The following program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for coming to this very special event, a cozy discussion with the Wickets. I think you're in for a real treat. I'm delighted to say that this afternoon's event is part of the 20th anniversary celebration of the Riviere Institute for Senior Education. And I can't think of a better way to celebrate 20 years of lifelong learning than by talking with authors. Now, my name is Nancy Nordstrom, and I am the facilitator of one of RISE's spring courses, which I called Cuddle Up with a Cozy. Today is actually the last class of our course, and during the course we've had a lot of fun. We've learned a lot about cozy mysteries, and for those of you that maybe this term is a little new, think about traditional mysteries in the vein of Agatha Christie. The murders usually take place off-site, so there's a little less gore, if you will. The characters are very likable. You get to know them along the way. The protagonists usually have very interesting occupations, which play into the stories in a big way. And they're kind of gentle, fast-paced puzzles. And they're just a lot of fun to read. With the summer coming on, great beach reads. So, and as I said, we get to know the characters and really follow their development. And they're part of a series usually, so if you start with book one, you can really go through and get to know them very well. Now, as I said, we've had a lot of fun with this course. We've learned about a lot of different mystery authors and their protagonists. We've watched a couple of cozy mystery videos. We played magical mystery mix-up with books. And we've seen interviews with authors on video and things like that. So my goal with the course was for the participants to leave with a long list of authors that they could read. And I think, that we've done this. And then so today, we're finishing up with this very special event. Now, when I first read about the cozies, it was just a year ago in the Boston Globe in April of 2016, I was immediately smitten. New England authors who call themselves wicked cozy authors, and they write about New England. How perfect is that? So I had to learn more, naturally. I went to their website, I signed up for their newsletter, and I sent Jessie an email outlining my idea. I thought it would be nice if one or maybe two of them would come and speak to my class about what they do. And lo and behold, all six of them wanted to come. And here they are. We have Jessie, Liz, Sherry, Barbara, Julianne, and Edith. Now, you've all got a handout that kind of gives you a little bit of their biography and what they write. So I'm just going to kind of go through it very briefly with you. First, we have Jessie Crockett. She lives for most of the year in New Hampshire with her dark and mysterious husband and exuberant children. And she summers on the coast of Maine, where she keeps an eye out for sea monsters and mermaids. And she writes the Sugar Grove Mysteries, which are a series of mysteries that take place here in New Hampshire, and it's about a family that runs a maple sugaring operation. And that's just one of the books that she writes. All of our authors here have more than one particular series that they write. Now, Sherry Harris, a former director of marketing, she thought that writing fiction couldn't be much different from writing ads. Well, she obviously found out she was wrong with that one. And she writes a series called the Sarah Winston Garage Sale Mysteries. And she gets her expertise, if you will, from about garage sales because she used to be a military wife, and she'd follow her husband around from base to base, and so she got to take in a lot of yard sales. And then we have Julianne Holmes, who writes the Clock Shop Mysteries. And she's also got a new series coming out in the fall of this year about a theater cop. So those will be, very interesting. And I like her Clock Shop Mysteries. For those of you that know anything about clocks, her protagonist inherited a clock store from her grandfather, I believe. So very interesting series. And then we have Edith Maxwell. She writes the Quaker Midwife series and the Local Food Mysteries. So, and also she writes Country Store Mysteries and the Cozy Caper Book Mysteries. So she's pretty busy. And so she also serves as president of Sisters in Crime in New England. And she lives north of Boston with her beau and 3 cats. Then we have Liz Mugavero. I hope I said that right. She writes the Positively Organic Mysteries. So you can imagine that her canine and feline rescues demand the very best organic food and treats around. And so she's also a member of Sisters in Crime. And finally, we have Barbara Ross, who's the author of the Maine Clam Bake Mysteries. Now, for those of you that know Boothbay Harbor, you'll immediately recognize her settings. And she lives in the summertime and writes on the big front porch of the former Seafarer Inn at the head of the harbor in Boothbay Harbor. So when they aren't in Boothbay Harbor, she and her husband live in Somerville, Massachusetts. Now, before we get going with the authors, I just want to say that their books are a delight to read. They're the perfect cozy to cuddle up with. And the fact that they're set right here in New England makes that even better. So what we're going to do is we will open up the floor to questions. But I thought what I would do first is ask the Cozies if they would tell us a little bit about how they got together and what they do when they're all together and how it benefits them all. So they just want to take it away?
Sure.
Okay.
I'm not sure we're going to tell you what we do when we're all together.
No. We're going to make it up.
Yeah.
That would ruin your images of us.
I always love our story of how we met. There's a big mystery conference in Bethesda, Maryland every year called Malice Domestic. And in 2005, my husband and I were living in Northern Virginia, and we found out we were being stationed at Hanscom Air Force Base. And fortuitously, that year at the banquet, I randomly happened to sit by Julie. And she said, "Oh, you've got to join Sisters in Crime, and you've got to go to the New England Crime Bake, a big mystery writers conference here." And it really was a life-changing event. And I won't tell the whole story, so you all can tell part of it, but that was my first connection with these ladies, and it has just been so wonderful.
This is only the second time all 6 of us have been on a panel together, so thank you so much for inviting us, because we love a reason to get together. So my next connection, and we'll all tell parts of this origin story, is a few years ago, so maybe the year before that, I won an honorable mention at Crime Bake for a short story I wrote. And I sat at a table with another person who lived in Somerville who also won an honorable mention, and it was Barbara Ross. And so that's how we met.
So I think the Crime Bake Conference is really the connecting factor here. I've been going to that for how many years?
I know.
A long time, 12, 13 years. So I sort of knew all of these ladies peripherally, and then a few years ago, when we all started to get our contracts for these various series that we're writing, Edith and Jessie and I connected because we were the first 3 to kind of sign up with the same agent and get a contract, and we started talking about doing a blog, and here we are.
Yeah.
So, I knew Jessie because our very first books were published, both of them in the summer of 2010. So that sort of gave us a connection, and we would see each other at Crime Bake and other places. And then when we all had the opportunity to propose these new series and wrote proposals, I was at Crime Bake, and I was really discouraged. And you're probably seeing through this a thread of you write alone, but you need to be in the book business with support and a network. And I got on an elevator at Crime Bake, and Jessie was on the elevator, and she told me she had just signed a contract for a new series. And I said, "That is the best news I've heard all day." because somehow the fact that she was able to do it just gave me that, what I needed to keep going, which was so important.
Barbara's being really sweet, but what she means is, if Jessie could sell it, we're all gonna win. So that's my part. We all do have the same agent, and I spend summers in Old Orchard Beach, and we all didn't know what we were doing. That is the truth. We did not know. And when you don't know what you're doing, it's really great to grab onto somebody else that doesn't know what they're doing, so you can all not do it right together. So I said, hey ladies, I have this house that's got none of my children in it. Would you like to come there for a weekend and we can try and all figure out together how to do this? And then that was really the first time we spent a significant amount of time together, and was, I think, the cementing of the situation was that physical time together.
And now we go every year. This year we're going in middle of May, and we're actually going to do one up at Booth Bay, at the big house on the bay there. But Jessie has hosted us every year in Old Orchard, and it's fabulous. Sisters in Crime is also a thread that brings us together. It's really how I met all of you. Mm-hmm. And it's an organization, it's 30 years old this year. And it was started by female crime writers like Sarah Beretsky and Linda Barnes and Sue Grafton, who met at a Mystery Writers of America conference, and they said, we're not getting reviewed in the New York Times, we're not getting nominated for the awards, so let's do something about it. So, 8 of them started this organization, and it's now international. We have a big online chapter, we have a very active New England chapter. Julie and Barb have been past presidents. I'm president right now. We have workshops, we network, we teach each other and support each other and write cover blurbs. People bigger than me, previously published, wrote cover blurbs for me. Hank Philippi Ryan and Hallie Efron, people like that. And now I'm getting asked to write cover blurbs for people coming up. So we get to give it forward, pay it forward. And it's just a hugely supportive group of mostly women. We do have brothers in crime. We have a few mysteries in crime. As long as they serve our mission of helping to get the word out about the women writers. So that's really another thing that completely drew us together. And I want to say something about the behind the scenes. So we do blog every weekday on wickedcozyauthors.com. But we're on email behind the scenes almost every day. The kind of things you don't want to put out on social media. Grousing about something, or what do you do about this, or where do I order bookmarks? Just helping each other along the way and sharing our delightful news when we get it. So that's really important too.
Very important. Yeah.
Okay, so now we've got a roving microphone. If people would raise their hand, Gail can spot you, and then you can ask questions of the authors. I'll start you off by saying, where'd you get your name?
Edith Maxwell is the name my parents gave me. That was my first name, and it's still my main name.
Do you mean the Wicked name?
Yes.
Some have
several names, yeah. Some of us have more than one name.
Well,
That'll be our next answer.
people in New England, or in Massachusetts, they would say that's Wicked Awesome. It's just a modifier. And who thought it up? I don't know.
I think it was Sherry. Was it you?
I don't know. It was one of those group things, I think, that just came. So.
And then it just seemed so right, because we're cozy, as Nancy said, because we don't have excessive gore, or excessive, I don't know what excessive sex is, but if there was such a thing, we do not have that. But we're also, there are murders and secrets, so the Wicked has given us the ability to kind of expand our portfolio as some of us have begun to write other things.
Some of us are more wicked than cozy personally, so it helps us to be ourselves while we're also being not ourselves.
I thought we said we weren't going to talk about that.
I didn't say who, but Sherry.
I also want to say, I want to take your class now, Nancy, now that we've
I know. I also wanted to say that the only thing worse than writer's block is attending an author event where the audience will not ask questions.
I think there was one
in the back.
Well, the ladies that write
different series. How do you go about it? How do you decide, you know, which one you're going to write at a certain time? But you write only one at a time and then go to a different one? How does it work?
Start with Liz and go that way, then this way.
So the contract and the deadline sort of drive that. And, you know, when you first see what your deadline is, you think, oh, I'll write this book now and I'll have it all tidied up before I have to start the next one. But usually it doesn't ever happen that way. And you're trying to figure out what the heck you're doing and when, and hoping it will all come together when it's supposed to. But yeah, usually, I don't know about the rest of you guys, but I try to space out the deadlines so they're not all overlapping.
I am just discovering how to do this because I have my second series coming out, and it's a long story. The publishing world is a whole different ball of wax and a whole different learning curve, and I am so grateful. I was the last of the Wickets to get a publishing contract, and I was so grateful to have them that much ahead of me so I could say I'm having a complete panic about what these copy edits mean, and Jessie coming back and talking me down on a Skype conversation that lasted 6 hours, and different things like that. But right now I have two books due. I have a book due in October and a book due in December, and I plotted them both. I'm really trying to finish the first book so that I can start working on the second book, so I can edit the first book, so I can edit the second book, and I can hit my deadlines. Next year, I have two books due again, and they're both due in October, so we'll have to, it's going to be a little dicier, but I do plot, which helps, and I'm writing under different names, as do many of us, because, you're writing for different publishing houses, or you want to create a new persona, whatever, so I've also learned and am writing under all my names have JH in them, so that, and they all sound like Julie because my real name is Julie, so that if somebody says Julie, I can respond, or Julianne, or Julia, or something that sounds like that. I can, because otherwise I would just be sitting there oblivious. So it's tricky. I'm about 3/4 of the way through a book right now, and I'm having dreams about the next book. So I need to obviously finish this book so that I can start the next one.
Oops.
I think that it feels like a job more when you have all these contracts stacked up and you need to be planning things. But it's also really a pleasure because you get to spend time in these really different worlds with really different friends. Imaginary friends are all you get really, so that you quite like them or really don't like them, but you really enjoy not liking them. So it's almost a palate cleanser from one thing to the next. Some of my books are a little darker than others, and so that feels refreshing to get to be lighthearted, or to get to be like dealing with all of that stuff that happens in your life that's not a lot of fun, and you can put it in the darker book. So I think it's really a benefit to get to have all of these things in process with something to anticipate all the time.
And I write 3 series. One of them is ending, but then I have a new one starting. So I do try to write one book at a time, one series at a time. That's, if I could organize it, I would organize it so I could write straight through a first draft, take 2 months, and not be interrupted by anything. It never works out that way. So I'll be writing, I write a historical mystery series set in 1888 with a Quaker midwife solving crimes. So I'll be in 1888 and long skirts and carriages and all that. And I'll get in copy edits from Southern Indiana, contemporary, lighthearted mystery. And they're due in 2 weeks. So I've got to drop the first draft, go to Southern Indiana, in my head, do my copy edits, send them in, and then I've got to reread the whole first draft up to where I stopped to remember the book, or I'll get in page proofs from a local foods mystery, again contemporary, and anyway, so that it always blows up. Or a book is releasing in a completely different series, and you've got to do blog posts and think about that book.
I have a question about how you're handling that, because
Yeah.
for me, and maybe, I don't know how you do that, Liz and Julie, is I do drafting work for a new draft in the morning, and then I do things like copy edits and the sort of blog posts and those nuts and bolts types of business things after lunch. And so I subdivide my time into like discrete blocks of what kind of work I'm doing. Do any of you do that too?
I do that I do that normally. So I do my creative work in the morning and that businessy stuff in the afternoon. But when I get in copy edits, I really need to, that's really creative work in a way. So I do stop the first draft, do the copy edits in my creative time. Yeah.
So Julie and I have a little bit of a different schedule because we both work full-time day jobs as well as write. So as much was that sympathy? So as much as I would say, yeah, I love to get up really, really early and do my creative work before I start my day job, and then after work I can do the other. It doesn't usually ever work out that way. So I really just have to take the time I have and figure out what needs to be done first and go from there.
Yeah, I agree. I work in a service organization for the theater community, so I also go to a lot of shows because that's part of my job. So if I can find an hour at midnight to write, I write at an hour at midnight. But usually it's Saturdays and Sundays, and I just sit and I bang it out and I get it done. My editor at Berkeley called me a machine because I never miss a deadline, but I oftentimes miss a lot of sleep.
Remember to repeat the question.
Yeah, that's right.
So, if I understand correctly, two of you are still working close to full-time, if not full-time jobs, and it sounds like maybe a little more than full-time, in addition to writing. Close. Is that better?
Yes.
Okay. Is your goal to eventually be able to write and give up your day jobs?
Well, yes, but I also, as I work in theater and I work in the arts, and so I'm also very pragmatic. I'm also single, so it's, it needs to be what it is, right? And the way I look at it is, how lucky am I to have these problems of time management, right? People would do anything to have these challenges. So I would eventually, yes, absolutely love to be writing full-time, but given who I am and the way I operate, I probably would still teach a class or do something else, because that's just how it goes.
That is absolutely my goal. I work in corporate America, and oh my God, the day I can say goodbye to that would be the happiest day of my life. As a matter of fact, in my series, my character starts out her new gourmet pet food business because she got job eliminated from corporate America, which has not happened to me. And I mean, really, I'm very lucky because I get to work from home, which is nice. But it's still, I would much rather be writing. Although I would run out of victims because I get a lot of my victims from the people I work with. So then I'd have to find a new supply of people to kill.
You're on TV, Liz.
Okay, a couple of you write under more than one name. How many of you write under more than one name, and why?
Should we go to you?
Well, I write under 3 names. So it's partly a marketing decision because it helps people to know that you're doing different types of books. So at this point, I write exclusively mystery novels, but they're not the same sort of mystery novels. So for my Jessie Crockett novels, these are contemporary, lighthearted, sort of silly and funny mysteries set in New Hampshire, in small towns. And for my historical series, the first one is Jessica Esteban is my name, and they are historical, they are grittier, there is more violence, there's more themes of unhappiness explored, and they're set in Maine, so they're Old Orchard Beach, Maine. And then I have a third name coming out in October on Halloween. These books will be set under the Jessica Ellicott name, and they're set in England in 1920. So these are with one publisher, these are with another. Publishers like their own name oftentimes for authors, unless your name is Stephen King or Janet Evanovich. They like to have their own fresh name with you, so that's also a reason.
Yeah, I write under Edith Maxwell and Maddie Day. And it's the same publisher for the local foods mysteries and the country store mysteries, but he wanted me to use a pen name for the country store mysteries. And I said to the agent we all have, I said, why? Like, people are just starting to learn who Edith Maxwell is. And he said they wanted to look like a debut author in the bookstores. So that's another reason. because it's exactly the same genre. My historical, the Quaker Midwife Mysteries, are with a different publisher, that my publisher at Kensington had declined that series, so my agent said it's fine, because he said, the other one said he didn't want it, so you can use Edith Maxwell. So. And my new Cape Cod Mystery series, which features a cozy mystery book group, will be also under the Maddie Day name. So.
Yeah, so I have 2 cozy series as well. The new one's coming out this summer, and there were 2 different publishers, so even though it's the same genre, I had to pick a different name. So that one will be under the name Kate Conti.
And again, Julianne Holmes actually, so this is another behind the scenes, is a write for hire. So Berkeley, which is a pretty big part of Penguin, part of Random House, had an idea for a series and they needed a writer. So this is the other story about the Wicked Cozies and support and everything else. Our agent, he wasn't mine at the time, I pitched other ideas to him and we hadn't come up with anything. But he called Barb Ross and said, we have this clock shop mystery that, you know, if we could find a writer for it, it's got to go. It can happen. And so Barb said to him, Julie Henricus, and he'd met me because Edith made me sit next to him at a banquet because I'm pretty shy in real life and I wouldn't normally talk to him. And so she's like, no, you're talking to him. So, because he needs to know you're a human being and you can hold up your end of the conversation and you're not a freak. So I said, okay. And so John knew me, and then Barb said, you know, I think Julie Henricus might be interested. And then she called me right away and said, I just want to tell you what I said to him and why I think you should do this. And so I did. And that, not a lot of people know about that route, but it happens more often than you think, where you get an outline of a story and then you add things. And if anyone's read my Clock Shop Mysteries, you know, there's a lot of the subplots, and there's a plot about a town, a clock tower in the town hall that I added in and things. So there's a lot of me in it, but I needed to pick another name in order to write that because they own that name. So if I decide not to continue this series, they can hire another Julianne Holmes. And when my parents were naming me, my last name is Henricus, which is long, and they were going to name me Julianne Holmes Henricus, which is a family name. And my grandmother told them it was too long, so I'm Julie Ann, which I think is a little bit boring, but there you go. And so when I needed to pick a name, I really wanted my folks to be able to hold a book with my name on it, but Julianne Holmes was pretty close. And then my new series, I'm writing under J.A. Henricus, so they can hold my name.
I wonder what your background was in your youth. Did you always like to write? Did you have an inspiring elementary school teacher or high school teacher, as many of us are sitting here in the audience now? And the second part is, where did that first character come from? Where did it drop out of? Is it autobiographical? Is it, where did that person emerge?
So 2 questions: what did we always write and what inspired us, and was it where our character came from?
Or English majors at college or whatever.
Okay, when I was growing up, my mom always, well, we started with Bobbsey Twins and Nancy Drew, but I also, we read a series of books by Maud Hart Lovelace, and they're the Betsy Tacy books, and her books are fairly autobiographical. They start when she's in 5th grade, and they go up through her wedding, and when she's 5, up through her wedding, and the level of the book increases as she grows. And Betsy wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be Betsy. And so I always wanted to be a writer. And so it was always a passion. And even though I ended up with a degree in business management, I had 30 hours of lit classes, and I went into marketing and wrote, ads and that newsletters and all that stuff. And but as far as where my character came from, so my story is also a thank you to Barbara Ross, because an editor in New York said, he went to our agent and said, I want somebody to write a garage sale-based mystery series. And John went to Barb and said, do you know anybody that could write this series? And Barb contacted me and she said, hey, what do you think about writing a garage sale mystery series? And I was like, well, can I think about it? And she said, sure. And I woke up the next morning and I said, of course I want to write this series. And so she put me in touch with John, our agent, and he said he wanted the proposal fast because we've mentioned the proposal and lots of mystery series, cozy mystery series are set on that, which means instead of writing the whole book, you write kind of a synopsis of what you see the series as being. You write a character sketch, you write the first 3 chapters, and you write
Comps.
Yeah.
Comparable series.
Comparable, little marketing thing, and you send that in, and the editors read it, and they say yes or no based on that. John said he wanted my fast, and I did it in 4 days, and it just poured out of me. And I'd been writing another series that I've never been able to sell with a gemologist as the protagonist. And I don't know, part of it, I had just read, I do some editing, freelance editing, and I had just read Barb's first book, Clammed Up, and I don't know if that ignited something, but it was an interesting process.
My Theater Cop series, which is going to debut in September, is about an ex-cop who runs a theater company. And that was the first book I tried to sell. And I tried for a long time, and I got lovely rejections, but I couldn't sell it. And I work in theater, so I know that world. And the reason I made her an ex-cop is I had a friend who was forced to retire from the Maryland State Police Department. And I said, are you going to become a PI or something? She said, if I can't wear the badge, I'm not going to do the job. And so, and she, so I thought, oh, so she was looking into becoming a cook or a baker. And so I thought, oh, that's interesting. Somebody who loves her career so much that when she can't do it anymore, she's not going to pretend. And so, not that being a PI or anything else is pretending, but you know what I mean? So Sully Sullivan is the name of that protagonist, and that story came to me. I was taking a class at Grub Street, and a literary fiction class, and kept going through things, and then I would talk to one of my classmates before class and during breaks, and I'd tell her what I was reading. And I was reading Elizabeth George, and I was reading all these other books, and I read, Agatha Christie. I wrote a master's thesis on Agatha Christie, and she said, why aren't you writing mysteries? You love mysteries, that's what you read. And my story was really boring. And then I dropped a body, and I thought, oh, that's a lot more interesting. Now there's a reason to tell this story because there's a dead body. So that's sort of what ignited. I love mysteries. I read cozy mysteries. And so that also helped me really dive into the genre. Oh, how did I get started? I've always written, and I didn't know that I could be a writer until much later, right? I think that's, if is anyone here an aspiring writer or a writer, because it's not aspiring? Right. So you're a writer. People will come up and say, I'm not really, and yes, you are. And it took me a long time to have that confidence to say, no, I'm a writer. Right. And to feel, again, when I tried to sell my first series and it wasn't selling, it took me a long time to understand it's not that the book wasn't good, it's just that there wasn't a market for it. Now, happily there is, but there wouldn't be unless I'd taken the leap on that. So I think I always dreamt of it, I just didn't say it aloud until I was probably close to 40.
Yeah, I was always a book nerd, so I loved books as a little kid. My mother used to read to me every morning before she had to get everybody off to school and work and all that. So I was very lucky in that regard. By the time I could read myself, I started reading Nancy Drew. I always knew I loved mysteries, and I think I always knew I would be a writer. I had no idea how that was going to ever happen. But I was an English major in college. My parents asked me, what are you going to do with that? Are you going to be a teacher? And I said, oh, heck no. That's not for me. And I just said, I'm going to be a writer. And they said, oh, that's nice. Well, you should probably get some other kind of a backup plan going. So I wrote stories and bad poetry, and I even tried to write a soap opera when I was a teenager and watching Days of Our Lives every day after school when I wasn't supposed to be. But it never got picked up for TV, unfortunately. And then I went to grad school, and I got a degree in writing and publishing. And then I realized that I should try to write a mystery because that's what I really love to read. And so then I started going to Crime Bake, and maybe 15 years later was when I had the call with my soon-to-be agent. He was looking for proposals, and we talked through what my interests were. So animals have always been a big thing for me. So somehow we came up with the idea of a gourmet pet food mystery series. So my character Stan, she sort of just came to me. She's not really like me. She's tall and blonde, first of all, which I'm neither of those things. She does like coffee a lot. And here's my dirty little secret. I don't cook. Stan obviously does. And so I needed a little help with the recipes, but we can talk about that later. So she cooks. She loves to cook and bake treats and, take care of all the animals in her town. And yeah, that's where she came from.
Hi, so I think you're getting the right impression here that I don't go around passing out publishing contracts like popcorn, that both Julie and Sherry had done the work. They had both completed manuscripts and been not just through the whole writing cycle and revising and editing and getting feedback and getting help and taking classes, but they had also been through the whole marketing cycle with those books. And I've kind of learned that people have to go through that. There's no real shortcut for that. So, we kind of have a saying in the Wickeds that, you do all the work so that when the luck bus rides by, you're ready to get on it. And that's really the way it works. So I always wrote, like a lot of these, I still have the story of Lightning, the runaway horse, that I wrote in second grade. And I was an English major in college. And but then I took a very long, almost inadvertent detour through software startups and educational technology. But I always wrote through that. I have a writers group that I've been meeting with regularly for 20 years. And that really is what kept me on track in the years of, husband, wife, 2 jobs, 2 kids, teenage, just craziness. That's what kept me writing. My first book, which is the one I talked about when Jessie and I had books published at the same time in 2010, was called The Death of an Ambitious Woman. And it was about a female police chief, because that's what I love to read. I love police procedurals. I love British police procedurals. I love Elizabeth George and P.D. James and Ruth Rendell's Wexford series and all of those. So I wrote about a female police chief, and you're always kind of, well, what can I bring? What uniquely suits me of all people to write this story? So I had been a boss. So I know what it's like to have the responsibility of being a boss. Most of the time, my employees were not making life and death decisions, though we made software for colleges and universities like this one, and believe me, if the software crashed, people treated it like a life and death situation. But most of the time I wasn't. But I had that sense of responsibility. And I really think that protagonist was almost too much like me. So when I had the chance to do this second series, I decided that the protagonist would be half my age. And that would be really something interesting to explore. So as the series opens, she's 30, and I just find that a really interesting age, having watched my kids. It's kind of when you're on the precipice of making a lot of really big decisions about the direction your life is going to take. So I find that in some ways more interesting, because it's not as much me. But I do find as the series goes along, her voice, which has always been, I ask my daughter, who's the age of my protagonist, like, would you say that? And she's like, well, I wouldn't say that, but, my cousin Julia, who listens to NPR all day, would say that. I do find that her voice and my voice, not so much the way she speaks, but the sensibility of the kind of ethereal voice become more and more one.
So I think I always knew I wanted to be a mystery writer because I read the Bobbsey twins as a small child, and the very first chapter book that I read was the Bobbsey twins at the seashore, I guess it was. And I was so proud. I was so proud of myself for reading a chapter book, like it was a real book, right? So, but I was a small child, but I was very suspicious of Mrs. Bobbsey because she had 2 sets of twins, which is weird in the first place, and then they didn't look anything alike. And I wondered what was wrong in her marriage and maybe what was wrong with Mr. Bobbsey, that I was the only one wondering about this. So I knew mysteries were definitely a way for me to go, and I had a really horrible second grade teacher who was very inspiring, to answer your question. She ripped an ad back when you could still have cigarette ads in, like, Family Circle magazine. She ripped it out and she pasted it to the blackboard, and she asked us to all write a story about the Marlboro Man. Oh. She had taken out like the Marlboro part, right? It was just the cowboy. And I knew this was a cigarette ad and was very judgy even then. So I knew that was a bad guy. So this was a crime story. And he went through the countryside and he stole things. And it was like there was a lot of intrigue. And then the teacher and I had a lot of things to say to each other about appropriateness. Also, spelling. She wasn't good at that. So I knew I was on the right track because I was very, very passionate about it. So it started early. And it suits me. Still judgmental and suspicious, so it's a perfect job. And the first character that I wrote at the same time that Barb was writing her first book, I had written mine, and that character sprang out of a personal crisis, as things often do, but it's sort of an odd personal crisis. I live in a very small village. And for those of you who live in very small New England towns, you know that there are some places in your town where everyone gathers and they set the tone. And that tone is either a pleasant tone in a village you love, or it is a place that everyone's popping up their for sale signs and not telling anybody who's looking at their house why they're getting out of Dodge. So in my case, one of those places was our post office. And we'd been there a good long time when our lovely postmistress, who made sure everything in that village ran in a way that nobody wanted to sell their house, retired. She retired. And it was heartbreaking. And they kept sending us substandard postal employees. We were truly spoiled, and this was just not going to work. So in order to get a great postmistress back, I had to make one up. And so she sprang to life in that book.
That's great. I don't think I've ever heard that story, Jessie. I didn't know I wanted to be a mystery writer until I was about 40. But I wrote stories constantly when I was a child. And I read voraciously. And I remember my mother telling me when I was 2nd or 3rd grade, she said, "Edie, you're a good writer." And I kind of went, "Well, I'll write them." Okay. And I've held that with me, to this day. And I found recently a newspaper clipping in an old scrapbook because I don't throw anything out. And I won my first paid fiction was when I was 9, and it was a little story called The Viking Girl, and I submitted it to a newspaper contest, and I won, and they paid me $2. And it's not a bad story. It's got a little story arc, it's only about this long. And we had a house full of mysteries. My mother was we had Agatha Christie, and we had Sherlock Holmes and Poe, and I had a very vivid imagination, and I got nightmares easily, so I wasn't allowed to watch scary TV. But the bookshelves were just fair game, so I was giving myself nightmares about Poe stories and Sherlock Holmes. But I did all kinds of other writing my whole life, academic writing and journalism and technical writing. And then I was taking some time off when my children were little, and I had a small certified organic farm in the northeast corner of Massachusetts. And I was reading a lot of cozy mysteries. That's all I read. And when my younger son went off to kindergarten, for the first time since I had kids, I had every morning to myself. And my now ex-husband, one of the best things he's ever said to me was, "Well, you like reading mysteries so much, why don't you write one?" And I kind of go, "Well, obviously." I had never thought of it. You know, I just had never thought. I'd never studied creative writing. I had a PhD, but I'd never actually taken a creative writing class. So I had this small certified organic farm. So I made up a character, but nothing like myself, except that she was a farmer. And she was, you know, like almost 6 feet tall and short red hair and geeky and an introvert. And I'm just not like that. And that ended up being 15 years later, or whatever it was, 20, my first local foods mystery. I wrote about 2/3 of that book, and then I left farming and I went into tech writing. But when again, the proposal thing with our agent, he was asking for ideas, and I said, well, I could write an organic farming mystery. And he called me and he said, that's brilliant. I was just talking to an editor who said, what about a locavore series, right? Local foods enthusiasts. I said, I used to be the farmer. I wrote 2/3 of that book. I am a locavore. Let's do it. And so that was my first protagonist. But I would say that thing my mother said to me was really, really something that inspired me to become a writer, a fiction writer, even though it was decades later.
Thank you. Very informative.
Hate these things. But anyway, you mentioned two things. You mentioned Stephen King and then appropriateness. 3 of us are middle school teachers, and they have a very distinct imagination, and sometimes what they want to write is, who knows if it's appropriate or not. I have a letter that is in draft form to Stephen King, and I don't know if I'll ever send it to him. My question is, you've had so you write mysteries, you draw bodies, you do whatever. As teachers, today, when we read a child writing about such things, how far do we go? What's the limit? Where a parent has to be informed, or administration, or the authorities. So that's my question. Could there ever be another Stephen King?
Wow. I don't have an answer. So, that's it. First of all, if you are a middle school teacher, God bless you. Because I couldn't even stand my own children when they were that. I remember once my kids' daycare was at the middle school in our town, and I went to pick my daughter up because she had a dress rehearsal for a ballet performance, and they were all getting out of school, and I'm sitting there thinking, my God, the kids in this town are the ugliest children what is wrong? And then the dress rehearsal for the ballet recital was at the high school, so I drove from the middle school up to the high school, and they were just getting on. These kids are gorgeous. This town is unbelievable. I mean, just that age is just unbelievable. So God bless. So I did attend there's an organization called AWP, which is kind of the convention for teachers of writing in academics, and for literary fiction. And I did attend their session on genre fiction, because I was like, well, this is just be interesting to see what literary fiction writers and academic teachers of writing at higher education think about genre fiction. And they said a bunch of things. One of the things they said is, and this worries me a lot for mysteries, is that basically kids write now fantasy. That we'll all say Nancy Drew, but they all grew up on Harry Potter. Right. So they read fantasy and they write fantasy. They will also very often resort to science fiction because they don't know how to end something. So one of the teachers told about this absolutely beautiful story about a guy and a girl, you know, a typical sort of coming-of-age story, and it's Thanksgiving, and they were a couple, and now they're both at different colleges, and they have to break up, and he was like, this is beautiful, 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 and at the end, a spaceship comes in and kidnaps both of them. And he said, you know, clearly this kid just had no idea how to end the story. So you'll see in younger writers a lot of these kind of left turns that will make you go, oh my God. But really, they're just sort of grasping at straws. So, I mean, I can't and I wouldn't take the liability of answering the when do you go to the parents, when do you go to the police question. But I do think that Imagination is a pretty big field, so for me, the edges of that would be very wide. More the question is the other kids, and when do you say, let's meet about this story privately? That seems more the line to me.
I teach arts management classes in college, and I think a lot about producing theater in 2017, and I talk to these students, and as I've been teaching for 10 years, I see the difference between 10 years ago of being able to think creatively. I used to be able to say, pick a play and do a budget, and that's all I had to say. I mean, but now we're gonna do Macbeth, and it's Suite 2, and we need to do that. I mean, they've been taught to be tested to such a degree, and they're so afraid of going outside the box and coloring outside the lines. So now I have a conversation with every class, and I am not the most popular professor because I keep telling them, you gotta understand the rules to break them, but you have to break the rules. You have to not fit in. You have to not be perfect. Life isn't, you don't get graded on life. And I think that they're afraid to do that. And I think that our generation didn't do well with giving everyone trophies. I also think 9/11 happened and everyone had PTSD for a long time, and we were raising these kids during that time, and as I told my class, we wrapped them in an extra layer of bubble wrap. Parents always do that, but we didn't give them the tools to break out. I said, you have to break out. And I've been getting emails since, especially last spring was a particularly fraught time because it was early in the election and everything else, and I've gotten 3 emails from that class, and I only had 10 students saying, you tried to get us ready. And I'm remembering what you talked about. And I got really not great evaluations after that class, but that's our job. But to understand that we're all value individuality so much right now that everyone's the same. And so it's up to us to sort of be, and as far as I'm with you, my brother-in-law teaches middle school, Godspeed.
So actually, what? I suddenly realized why that question resonated for me. So when my son was in 6th grade, which at that point was in his elementary school, but the same age, right? Typical parents' night, and they have stuff posted all around the room, and one of their assignments had been to write a haiku, and there's all these butterflies and flowers, and my son's haiku starts, an old man lies dead in the doorway. So maybe that's why I answered you the way I did. And I really thought they were going to report us to somebody.
I think that, so I have 4 kids, and I facilitated a middle school writing group in my town for 4 years. I've judged a lot of fan fiction competitions for middle and high school aged kids. I think that people do need to keep an eye on the things that come into their orbit that worry them, and they need to ask why it worries them. Is it offensive to them because of a moral position they have? Is it offensive to them because they think that student should be doing better at that age with being more mature with their content? Is it vulgar? Those questions, I think, are often questions adults ask about things that kids do. I can't speak to whether or not someone is worrisome in their writing. I would say, in the way that Julie said, that I'm always super pleased when I encounter someone who's done something creative and interesting enough to actually start to slightly offend me, to intrigue me enough to make me pause, as opposed to something that's repetitive or no thought, no effort, no creativity. I would also go so far as to say, I think that oftentimes the people that are posing more of a problem are quite possibly people who are not writing things down. They are thinking things and not writing them. There are also kids who are exploring other people's problems. I found that in the middle school group. We had children reporting bullying, self-cutting, things of that nature. And because we had established a comfortable, safe zone to share creative work and all sorts of things, I was able to talk to the kids about whether or not that was them. And it wasn't them, but it was people they knew. And so you're able to talk about, there are adults in the building that you might want to talk about if you're concerned about your friend. Things like that. So I think that you should evaluate and use your own internal guidance system, but I don't think it's always a worrisome thing. And I would say that so far, my children have proved to be pretty well adjusted, and I like spending time with them, so that's a pretty good, even when they were middle schoolers, I liked them. But one of my proudest and most worrisome parenting moments, I was on the way back from a Taekwondo class that we had one of my kids in, and I had two of the other kids in the car, and they were 12, 8, and 4 at that point, and so the 4-year-old is in a car seat. We're driving along a country road, and we're just chatting about something I was working on, and the 4-year-old pipes up and says, "I know a great way for you to kill that person, Mama." And I'm like, I couldn't decide if I was so proud or I was the world's worst mother. But you know, that kid was onto something.
This has nothing to do with middle school, but when we get together as writers in public, when we go to these conferences and we go out to dinner or lunch, this is one topic of conversation. Oh, I read about a great new poison. You know, undetectable and this and that. And, you know, waiters and other diners start backing away.
I'd like to go back just a little when two of you said an editor called with an idea because the editor needed someone to write the story. I always thought it was the other way. You had the ideas and gave it to the editor. I haven't heard this. Can you comment?
Well, our agent is a New York agent. He lives right outside of New York City. And he knows some editors. He has got a close relationship with some editors. And sometimes he'll bring proposals from the agent's writers to the editor with the writer's idea. But sometimes the editor will say, "Gee, I'm looking for a gardening series. You got any of your clients write a gardening series?" Or, you know, whatever it is. So it does go both ways, at least in our experience with our agent.
I think some of that can also stem from, there are lots of publishing houses, and it's like Colgate toothpaste and Crest toothpaste may be like, you know, they both want to have bacon soda freshness with tartar control, right? So if you've got a, well, but it is, right? So maybe a toothpaste mystery would be good. If one house is doing really well with a certain subgenre, like gardening mysteries are a very popular way to combine two very popular activities for leisure time in the United States, reading and gardening. So if one of the houses doesn't feel like they have a strong line, including that, and one of their competitive houses does, they might want to add that because it's clearly a good idea. And so that's sometimes how ideas flow from the editorial staff towards writers, because they're looking at it from a business standpoint of what they'd like to include in their business, as opposed to just the creative end that the writers bring to it, regardless of how they do the work.
Can I add something?
I was just going to say that, in fact, my Cozy Mystery book group series, my new one, that was my editor's idea. He said, "What about a book group series?" I went, "I can do that."
And the other thing in the whole being competitive thing, most book deals get announced on a website called Publishers Marketplace, but they didn't announce my garage sale mystery series because they wanted to keep it a secret so they could be out with it first. So it's very interesting, the business side.
Well, and also just as a point of reference, you can get published without an agent. We all have the same agent. One of the benefits of having an agent is that he or she does have these relationships with editors, and if an editor is behind an idea, it's one step closer to getting approved up the chain. So, so we've all gone a pretty traditional route so far, and it's easier to get places, I think.
Also, it's pretty unique to, I think, the cozy mystery genre. thrillers don't get sold on proposal. They get written and sold. Maybe some romances get sold on proposal, but it's usually the traditional mystery.
And we're selling 3 books at a time.
Right.
Yeah, so my second series came about because the publishing house that wanted it, I think they thought they were missing out on the whole cat cozy thing, you know, because cats are a big deal in cozy mysteries.
Yeah.
Even if there's not really a cat character in a book, there's usually a cat somewhere on the cover. I'm not really sure why. But so this editor happened to call up my agent and say, hey, I need a cat book. And so he called me, of course, right? But she didn't really have much else to go on aside from she wanted a cat. So it took a little work to figure out what the cat was actually going to do and what role the cat was going to play. So we finally got to a good place about that. But
Which is, tell them.
yeah, so it's actually, the series is the Cat Cafe Mysteries. And so we went through a little bit of a dialogue about, she wanted a cat about town was what she was originally calling it. And so that brought about all the questions like, what is the cat going to do about town? You know, I mean, I didn't really want the cat to be solving mysteries, but so we figured out that we were going to have a cat cafe and the cat was going to kind of be the mascot, but the cat would also be the one that would find all the dead bodies on the island where the cat cafe was located. So.
She's coming.
I'm interested in the creative process, and when you start a book, is the first thing that comes to your mind your characters, and you start outlining that? Do you first figure out, oh, well, this is what the murder is going to be, and you kind of back into your plot? Do you map out your whole plot before you start writing your chapters? And what's the mechanics of how you generate your first strand?
Who wants to go? Go. You can start.
Well, you're going to get 6 different answers. And so I'm probably the most anal retentive about this, so I think it's probably a good place to start. I get a pack of 100 index cards. I open up that pack. I have noodled it in my brain, but I'm a plotter. And so I tell myself the story. I've thought about characters. I've thought about setting, because setting's really important. And I just keep first I start on paper, keep telling myself the story until I've got an outline, and then I really specifically outline the entire book. And it's also because of the day job. If I had to think at 10 o'clock at night, it doesn't, right? But if I sit down, I say, oh, you know, Sully's got to meet with Harry and they've got to talk about this and we need to drop this clue. It's like, I can write that scene. So, and as I said, I'm having dreams about the next book I'm going to be writing because it is a magical process in that these people visit you and live with you while you're writing the book. I will sit down and I'll think, oh, Ruth would like that cup of coffee. I mean, literally, you know, oh, she'd love that necklace. It's like she's not real. I mean, she's in my brain. But that's how, you know, you're like, you know, I sit around looking and think, oh, I got to remember that was here. So you sort of have that process as well. So I am a definite plotter.
And I'm the extreme opposite end. I've been forced to do a little plotting because I have to turn in a synopsis for each book now, so I have a general idea. But one of my favorite stories from our retreats is we're all sitting around writing, and Julie said, oh, where are you in your book, Sherry? And I said, oh, I'm writing the end. And she's got, oh, I didn't know you were that far along. And I go, well, I'll have to go back and write the middle. But and the look of horror on her face was just priceless. But for some reason, when I'm writing, and I do just kind of tend to go sit at the computer and see what'll happen, I usually have a good idea of who was murdered and who did it. And as I write, I work out the why they did it. But it works for me, and so I write that way. They keep trying to make me plot.
So it is my lifelong dream to be a plotter because I think it would make my life really easy, but I somehow just can't seem to get my act together to do it, even though I try. But I'll tell you the story of my most recent book, of which Jessie has a starring role, and Sherry. So I try to plot, I really do. So this one was actually a little bit more plotted out than any that I had ever written. So this is will be book 6 in my Positively Organic series, which is coming out in September. So I was kind of going along my merry way. I had maybe half the book written, and I say half the book loosely because I had half my word count, but I think the story was really not there. And so I was sort of stuck, and I was sort of procrastinating, and I thought I had till April 1st to write the book. And then in January, my editor emailed me and said, hey, you still get to turn this book in on March 1st. And I said, no. And he said, oh, well, you have to be because we moved up the production date. And I said, oh, great. So I had a little bit of a meltdown. And
one of the behind-the-scenes email meltdowns.
Cried a little bit. And then Jessie very nicely volunteered to walk me through a plotting exercise to help me get back on track. So we spent a couple of hours on FaceTime. We talked through all of my blocks and all of my problems and all of my plot points, and I got unstuck. And then she made me write out on little sticky notes in the shape of a dead person all of my scenes. Dead Fred. Yes, Barb bought us dead Freds, and so we now use these all to try to plot, some more successfully than others. So I put all the dead Freds on my wall, and I moved them around, and I finally got a story sort of cemented in my head, and then I was able to actually finish the book, and it was only a week late. And then Sherry was editing it in real time, and as Sherry likes to say, she writes the end first. I can't, for some reason, ever write the end. Like, it is the worst part for me. I'm not sure why that is, but at 3 a.m. the morning this book was due a week late, I was writing the end of the book. And Sherry was reading it and telling me if it was awful or not. But the funny part of this is my editor, once he read the book and accepted it, he wrote to me and said, I love the ending.
So I don't plot. I'm one of these people, I have to write to know what I think. So when I was in the corporate world, I had to kind of write the memo that was, here's the definition of the problem, here's all the alternatives, here's the consequences of all the alternatives, here's my recommendation, before I knew what my recommendation was. So my fiction is the same way. So one of the nice things about a series, honestly, is that half your cast and usually most of your setting exists before you start writing. So we're on schedules where we're writing everywhere from a book a year, but maybe writing multiple series, to writing a book every 6 months. I'm writing a book every 9 months, although that was 10 recently, which was ugly. But I could never do that if I didn't have half my cast and my setting already when I walk into the world. So that work was done early on and was relatively easy. For quite a while, what I did was I would just put a body in a really odd place. So in the first Clam Bake Mystery, I have a body hanging from an abandoned mansion on an island. And then the second one, a body rolls out of the clam bake fire. And the third one, there's a body trapped under a lobster boat. By the time you figure out not just one, but 4 people, say, who would have motive, means, and opportunity to do that, you've kind of written a book. So that worked pretty well for me. Right now is a very odd period because my editor just bought 3 more Clam Bake Mysteries without me writing any sort of proposal or outline, and another novella. So this is the first time I'm ever starting at absolutely zero. I mean, I've not written a word down about these books, and I'm finding it a really interesting and nerve-wracking experience. But one of the things I do is decide what I'd like to know about. So the Clammed Up is kind of how do you run a business like this on an island, and Muscled Out is kind of about the lobstering industry. Boiled Over is about the blueberry industry. So I kind of pick something maney that I'd really like to investigate, and that helps a lot.
So I wasn't always a plotter like I am now. You can reform. Good to know. Liz didn't go on to tell you that she actually called me not that much later and said, "Can we plot another one together?"
I'm really trying to reform.
She did it. So she is reformed. I start out all of my books in a notebook with a pen, and I just start asking myself questions because, like Barb, I need to be actually writing. I wish I were dreaming about my characters or things that they were doing. I have to be actually writing to know what I'm thinking about with it. So I ask myself questions, and then I answer all the questions, and I answer them lots of ways, like in very divergent ways. So is she tall? Is she short? Is she rich? Is she poor? Is she the killer? Is she the victim? And I kind of get a feeling in my gut, like, oh yeah, that's the answer, and then I'll circle it. And then sometimes I don't get a good answer, so I leave some space, so I'll come back to it later. And most questions ask another question and make another question occur to me. So I get about halfway through the notebook, and I know a lot about what that book is about. And so I used to wander around a bit and work without much more than that. But I hit some deadlines that it was getting kind of tough. And so I made myself outline. And what I noticed was I was having the entirely same range of horrifying emotions in a much more compressed time period. Same desire to raid the refrigerator, same snappy behavior with my family. And it was really informative. And so I just make myself do it now. And I use the dead threads. And I might need to find out where you got those. And it works really well for me. I just, scene by scene by scene, I know I need between 48 and 60 scenes, depending on the length of the book. I know that I need a midpoint, I need some turning points, I need a crisis point, and then I can kind of lurch and stumble between those points and fill in the gaps based on my handy notebook full of questions. And oftentimes I already answered and figured it out in the book. I come back and find out I did.
Yeah, by nature, I'm not a plotter at all. My first couple of books, I just wrote. I set up my setting and characters. I followed them around, wrote down what they did until the book was over. With many of us, I have to, as soon as I turn in a manuscript, I have to write a synopsis for the next one and send it to my editor. And the first time I did that, I kind of outlined the first scene, and I said something about the middle, and then this is how it ends. And Liz had just sent our editor like a 4-page synopsis, and mine was like half a page. And he said, "Well, I think you've got a story, but this is way too short, and you should do one like Liz's." Okay. So now I write a whole page, and he's still, whatever, we're making it work. and then I ignore it, and I start writing the book. But when so I love writing the beginning. The beginning is easy. It just goes on, 20, 30,000 words. It's, you're setting everything up and you're starting to follow people around, you find a body and stuff. And I love writing the end. Like I love writing the big action scene and then sort of the resolution. And I completely get stuck in the middle. Every single book. I've written 14 novels now, 15, something like that. And every time I get stuck in the middle, I can't get my arms around the first bit of the book and remember it and still move it forward. And I always do. I get through that. But now what I find is if I go back and look at that synopsis that does have some details about the middle, I'll go, oh, that was a good idea. Maybe we'll do that. And that's one thing that gets me a little bit unstuck. But I've started books different ways. So sometimes I think about the setting, like my first local foods mystery. She's an organic farmer. She's got a hoop house, a greenhouse, and a difficult former employee that she finds with a pitchfork through his neck. And it just kind of went from there. But then sometimes you hear about a great murder weapon. Like I heard about liquid nicotine. People vape, those vaping cigarettes. 2 little vials that go into those cigarettes can kill an adult. And it's flavorless. You can just put it in coffee. And I went, clearly I have to use this. Okay, so let's see. So I need a villain who smokes, who vapes, and and you set up 3 or 4 suspects, but I don't always know who the villain is out of those 3 or 4 suspects. I have to write the book, and the villain will be revealed. It's a mystical process, and I'm actually afraid to plot because I think I would be bored stiff writing it. And if I'm bored writing it, I assume you will be bored reading it. So I just don't go there.
We have time for one more question. Sue?
If you have somebody, they kind of touched on my question.
Yes.
Mine was gonna be real quick. Do you think that's why John Irving just threw in dancing bears?
Yeah.
That's why John Irving threw in dancing bears.
Yeah, enough with the bears, John.
Well, they do say, some famous author said, well, when nothing's happening, just shoot somebody.
Yeah.
I don't know. Yeah, go ahead.
I wonder how much research you do before you start a book in determining location, characters, characteristics of the characters. I know I read a book by Barbara Ross, Logged In, and you described a trip through Massachusetts to Connecticut, and I knew that was the exact route you would take. So I got right into it. It was like, yes, that was the way you would go to Connecticut. So I felt very comfortable. So I just wonder how much you do that.
I'll start because I've got the mic in my hand. It really depends on the book, and it depends on if I'm starting like a new series. When I started this series set in southern Indiana, which is a place I used to live a couple of decades ago, or 4 decades ago, a while ago, I did take a road trip out back to Indiana and just hung out and explored some of the areas where I wanted to set my fictional town. With the historical series, as Jessie knows, we have to do a lot of research on how people talked and how they rode around and what kind of underwear they wore and everything, how they ate. And some of that I do beforehand, and some I kind of do along the way, and some I check after my first draft. After I batted out that first draft, then I've written all these little notes to myself, check this, and I go back and check. So that's a whole different kind of research, the historical. And some of it, I've heard anyway, that the trained people are very particular, so you have to get your train details perfect. But so it sort of depends, for me anyway, if I do something ahead of time, or I kind of figure out what I need as I'm writing it, because again, I'm not sure what's going to happen. So I may figure out something I need to check. As long as it doesn't change the plot, I'll just write myself a note, and then I'll check it afterwards.
One of the things that I really enjoyed about most of my books is they've taken me a while to get from first glimpse of what might be happening to becoming a book. So I start putting things in the hopper as I'm going along. Like I knew about this book. It's a historical mystery. I knew about it long before I wrote it, and so I knew that I wanted to write in Old Orchard Beach. And so I knew I wanted it to be historical because there's a really rich history in that town. And I started visiting the historical museum. And I knew where I wanted to put it. And then I started hearing this woman speaking to me about her, like who she was. And I thought, oh, okay, I know who she is. So then I kind of needed to know, I was curious about, she's a con artist and she's a psychic. She's both. So I started doing a lot of my research on psychics, con artist psychics and true believers. I visited 2 different spiritualist enclaves to do interviews with people that are true believers in varying degrees of ability. That was a really fascinating thing. And so a lot of that is part of my research. I kind of need to know. I don't like my research to be heavy-handed in my books. I want it to just feel like it's rising organically out of the story. So I like to sit with it for some time and have a lot of volume of background of things I read, reading contemporary work, so that I know how people, the fiction they liked and what intrigued them and all that sort of thing at that point. But I only really follow threads that interest me. So it's always a pleasure. It never really feels like work.
Yeah. So I like to say that to tell a lie, I like to stand on a foundation of truth. So the surer I am about what's true, the easier it is to make things up. So as it happens, my kids live in Connecticut and my parents lived in Pennsylvania, and Connecticut is the biggest small state in the country because I've spent more time on 84 than anywhere else in my life, I think. And that includes commuting on 128 every day. So that we also have a really good writer friend, Angelo Pompano, who writes short stories, as A.J. Pompano, who lives in Guilford, and I actually sent him those 4 pages of that scene and said, can you please check? And because you can sort of Google Earth things, but it really helps to have that local connection. But in the 5th book, Iced Under, I had known for a while that Julia's mother's family made and lost a fortune. And I decided they made and lost it in the ice trade, because I just think that is so freaking nuts that in these little tiny ships in 1820, people were sending ice to India and Havana, and I just thought that was so crazy. And I loved doing that research. So for me, the research is part of the fun.
Yeah, like Edith said, it really depends. You know, my in the Positively series, I'm established enough in the town that, you know, I did a lot of that research way back before I started it, and I live next to a town that's sort of based on the fictional town that is in the book, so I kind of already had the benefit of living there and understanding what it was like. So now it's really about, you know, whatever mystery happens to be in the book that I need to research. For the new series, I had to spend a little time kind of understanding how a cat cafe would work, you know, what the model looks like, how you would set it up if you were going to run it, and also island life, because I had never spent much time on an island. So my setting is going to be sort of a fictionalized Martha's Vineyard. So I had to go out and kind of poke around and see what life might be like out there. So.
When I had the opportunity to write about a clock shop, it was fortuitous. I love, in many cozies, you learn something. That's part of the genre, is that you learn something, or, you know, you're established. And I love the idea of learning about clocks. My grandmother left me a clock, you know, so everyone has an emotional attachment to a clock at some point, even if it's not worth much. I went down to the American Clock and Watch Museum in Bristol, Connecticut, and walked around and saw things and took pictures and came up with some stories that I used, or some threads that I could use. But then I was also telling a friend of mine about the series, and she said, you know, my husband's a clockmaker. And I said, I did not know that. So I spent some time with him, and that for me was the best kind of research, because clocks are amazing and fascinating. And, you know, I don't know if anyone listens to the podcast S-Town, but I'm trying to figure out how we can take those millions of downloads and use it as a marketing tool for my books. But clockmakers have to apprentice for like 10 years. It's incredibly specific work. There's no guarantee of income. If you're really good at your job, someone will, in South Carolina, will call my friend Dave to have him come to South Carolina to look at their grandfather clock and see if he can possibly fix it, to bring it back up here and then fix it. So he and his wife will like take a month and make that whole thing work. And they took me up to a clock tower, because that's part of the you know, 3rd book. And when I was thinking about the clock tower, I thought this is what it will be. And then he took me up. It's like, well, I would have been wrong, because that's not what a clock tower looks like. It's actually a beautiful piece of machinery with arms and things like that. And then the nice thing about, and it took him a while, but you say, how can you kill somebody with a clock part? And the first time they meet you, they kind of look at you, and now he starts emailing and says, okay, Julie, this is what we kill him in the clock tower. Thanks. But also what I recognize and what I tried, because in the theater series, I know theater. I've worked in theater for a long time. But what I try to bring forth, and the research helps, and I could do research forever, but is the passion of the people doing the work. So I want to give people a taste of what it is, but I also want them to help people understand why somebody would do what they do. So it's not just that she fixes clocks, it's that she inherited the shop from her grandfather, who taught her to love clocks, and what clocks mean, and the passion behind them, and the stories behind them, and the family legacies that are often tied to clocks as she's fixing them. And that's part of the research, and that I feel really blessed to have been able to dive into that world.
And I have to tell you, because I edit for Julie, when she handed me the book, I was like, clocks? And you would never know she hadn't known things about clocks her whole life. Yeah. I was so truly amazed when I read it. It's fabulous. As far as setting goes, so my husband was in the Air Force. We were stationed at Hanscom for 3 years, and then we lived in Bedford for 2 years. So my daughter could finish high school. But by the time I got the contract, I'd moved back to Northern Virginia. And so when I got the opportunity to write the series, I knew immediately I wanted to set it in New England because I fell in love with living here. I remember the first night or second night we were here, I went to TJ Maxx or Home Goods to get something, and these two women were talking in the way, and she's like, "Go get a carriage." And I was like, "They have carriages here?" You know, I'm thinking Cinderella. And the lady comes back with her shopping cart. And I just fell in love with the quirky way you pronounce things and fluff and jimmies or sprinkles. And I loved it all. So I had to set my books up here. And so that's been really fun. And as far as garage sales, I went to my first one when I was in second grade. My friend's family had one. And I was like, you can sell your old stuff and somebody will buy it? and actually, I enjoy buying stuff from garage sales more than selling them, but that was both a good fix. And I just want to thank you all for being here, taking time out of your busy lives to spend time with us, because it's been a great pleasure.
Yeah, it really has.
I don't know about the rest of you, but I could stay here for another hour and listen to them. They're probably tired. But I want to give you all time to be able to come up and talk to them about their books and, you know, maybe get to meet them personally as well. But before we do that, I have a couple of things to finish up with. They thanked us, but I want to thank them for coming from all over New England and Virginia to come here today and talk to us. So thank you all very much. Secondly, big news. I want to wish them good luck later this month at the Malice Domestic Book Conference in Bethesda, Maryland, because three of them, Barbara Ross, Edith Maxwell, and Jessie Crockett, have received 4 Agatha nominations for Best Contemporary Novel, Best Historical Novel, and Best Short Story. So good luck, ladies. And thirdly, I just want to let you know, if you have any friends or family, neighbors who wanted to come today but their schedule would not permit, they're going to do this all again at 6 o'clock tonight at Barnes & Noble in South Nashua. So they're welcome to come by and say hello and listen to them again so they don't have to miss out on it. So anyway, just give them a couple of minutes to get set up. Oh, and one more thing. From Riviera University and the RISE program, we have a little gift for each of you.
Aww. Thank you so much.
We very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you all so much. And come talk to us. We have bookmarks, happy to answer questions. Absolutely.
Okay, so they'll get set up over here and then you can come talk to me.
That's so sweet. Thank you.
The preceding program was provided by an independent producer solely responsible for its content. The opinions expressed do not necessarily represent the views of this station, its staff, board of directors, or underwriters.